In this episode of Why Authors Write, I'm delighted to welcome Virginia Pye. Her just published Marriage and Other Monuments joins three other historical novels, two of which were set in pre-revolutionary China, and one, Virginia, my personal favorite, before Marriage and Other Monuments, the literary undoing of Victoria Swan, which is set in a very different era in the Gilded Age in Boston, Beacon Hill society in the late 19th century. So, Virginia, welcome and thank you for joining me to talk about why and how you write these amazing novels.
Thank you so much for having me. I am delighted.
I love talking to authors about what goes on before the book gets published and what it's like to finish it and what it's like to promote it. And you're in that moment where you're going to be able to talk about all of those things. So, first off, just to step a little bit back from your current book, Virginia, what has attracted you to that historical novel format or motif? And you clearly took a step away from it with Marriage and Other Monuments, and yet it seems like there might be some commonality. So let's start there.
I'm drawn to stories where the personal, private, domestic type stories, relationships between characters is set against a backdrop of something happening of note, of historical note in the society where the characters live. So I was drawn in my earlier books to write about Americans in Northwest rural China. In one case, it was right in 1910 as the empire was changing and modern era was starting in China, and these hapless Americans end up there. And then the second book, Dreams of the Red Phoenix, was about Americans also in China, the same extended family there. And this was in 1937, right as the Japanese attack. Communism is on the rise, fighting against the nationalists. The country is essentially starting to fall apart at the start of the war. Victoria Swan is set in a peacetime here in Boston and Cambridge, 1899. But it was a moment when women in the society, in American society, were undergoing huge changes. And my character of Victoria Swan is a hardworking woman who happens to be a writer. She's a dime novelist who ends up suing her Boston publisher for underpaying her as a woman. So there's a lot of tangles in that book that has to do with sort of the changes in women's lives in that moment and how the society, the old ways are on their way out. And same thing with Marriage and Other Monuments. It's set only in the summer of 2020, so only 5 years ago, and yet it feels historic already because that was this key moment after the murder of George Floyd in late May 2020, when Richmond, Virginia, where the novel takes place, like so many places across the country, had experienced riots and people taking to the streets and encounters between protesters and police. And on top of that, there was also a sudden surge of energy and activity to bring down the Confederate monuments that had been there since, for over generations and decades. And so my characters, who are not necessarily political, like in each of these novels, it's not that the characters are famous politicians or someone on the front lines. They aren't necessarily right in the thick of the action, but the society around them is swirling and changing. And how does that affect their private lives? And what could be more private than marriage? So that's the place where internal change is affected by external societal change. So it's historical novels, but this is my particular interest, I guess you could say, or way I have of looking at the world, and where the social elements play this key role in each of the books.
And certainly in the marriage and other monuments, those relationships do get rocked and
Mhm, mhm.
sometimes tipped over, in a
Yeah.
very interesting way that I'm glad you gave that context that you want to set those relationships in each of your novels up against a very important moment of transition in society into the craft of writing for you.
Ooh.
And how do you go about plotting your novels? Do you start with your characters that you're going to set up against this timeline? Do you start with a lot of research? Do you combine the two? Tell us about the process, if you would, of putting together these two factors that inspire you.
Well, that's a great question. I feel like with each book, it's a little different, but maybe we can figure out if there are commonalities. I do research. I do not do exhaustive research. I think it's really important for novelists to not go down too many rabbit holes. That the way to do research for me, anyway, is to follow my instincts about what I'm curious about, and to find interesting facts and information, but not to become overburdened with trying to get every detail right. And you don't have to become an expert on whatever the field is, or whatever the moment is in which you're setting your novel. But okay, so that's just a little bit about research. But how did I start this book? So I'm going to just use Marriage and Other Monuments as an example of how my process works. I actually lived, my husband and our family, two children, lived in Richmond for close to 20 years, and that's where our kids were raised. And while living there, I wanted to write a novel set there. I wrote a whole novel about two marriages of two sisters who are estranged from each other. Both of their marriages are on the rocks for different reasons, and how they have to come to rely on each other, these two sisters. And my agent at the time tried to sell it. We came close, but it didn't quite find a home with a publisher. So I set it aside. And then steadily, the years passed, and I wrote Victoria Swan. I had researched Richmond. I had a sense of the city, and I knew I wanted to set a story there. Yet I hadn't succeeded. So I set it aside. And then along came the summer of 2020. And in this case, the inspiration was what was happening at the moment, watching late at night, into the wee hours of the morning, these videos taken by student activists at protests in Richmond. And I was very anxious about my friends and our son who still live there. And I was very involved from afar. This was during lockdown. I was in Cambridge. I couldn't travel down there, but I ended up following the action on the streets and in terms of the Confederate monuments as well. So, and their removal, eventual removal over the course of that summer. So, okay, so what do you need to get started on a book is, I think, something that inspires you. So in this case, in the first instance with the first book, set in Richmond, it was simply trying to capture a feeling of a city and its history and what characterizes it, and how to try to show that through these characters' stories. In this, I ended up taking parts of that earlier book, transposing them into this new version, Marriage and Other Monuments, still set in Richmond, still with at least one of the couples, the same couple, got carried over from the earlier book, but I added a whole different second couple, because now the story really was about this city in crisis and how to try to capture that. So sometimes it can be research that you find in a book. It can be research from travel, something inspires you. It can be something you read for fun. And for me, it's often about place and then populating it with characters. And there's usually some question or something I'm trying to explore. And in this case, in both of those versions of this book about Richmond, it was how to try to respectfully, joyfully, and critically capture the city of Richmond in a novel.
Well, thank you. And indeed, you've inspired in me at least three other questions, but I'll
Okay.
uh, I will go to one of them, which I didn't know, and that is, I didn't know that you had a book written about Richmond and you didn't sell it and you put it on the shelf, so to speak. How does that feel? Uh, that's a lot of effort. And did you say to yourself when it didn't sell, I can revisit this later? Did you say, I'm done with this, I'm moving on? Tell me.
I have had this experience many times, and I'm not alone in that. Many published authors have their so-called debut is in fact their fourth, fifth, sixth book. In my case, my debut was in fact my sixth. So I had written five previous books. Um, and I'd actually done that same thing of gutting some of the earlier books and stealing things from the earlier books to put into the book that eventually became my debut. So I have a habit of doing this. I sort of, I sort of fillet my older books and reuse them, put them into a different stew and use them differently. I don't even talk about how it feels anymore. Like in the sense, it's so much part of what it means to be a writer. I was definitely upset, saddened, disappointed, but you put it aside. You just have to put it, and I don't, I sometimes, I have many printed versions. I have them in a box, put the box away, put it on my computer, and then you just move on and you try to write the next one. I know you're going to ask me at some point a piece of advice for writers, and one of my main pieces of advice is assume you have more than one book in you. Assume, because people get so attached to their books. And I don't blame us. I know we love our work. However, it might not be the right moment for what you've written. It might not have to do with the quality of it. So instead, you have to just put it aside, know it's there, and move on and assume you have an next book in you. And so that's what I did. And that's what I have done for you know, decades.
Yet it sounds like, Virginia, you let go, but you also hold on in
Yeah.
that you stuck to the idea that you wanted to write about Richmond. And when a new chaotic set of events that had impact on the residents happened, you went back to that idea. And from what you've said, you also reused maybe the sister framework and the one couple's relationship at least found its
Yep.
way into the new and published Marriage and Other Monuments. And I'm going to then ask you about that plot first, character first, or combination thereof.
Well, I do think about character first. I do think about who these people are. However, for me, what the way to understand the characters is to have things happen to them or have them create circumstances around themselves. And so you can call that plot. I think of it as storyline. And I have to have my characters doing things. I have very active first chapters. In my very first novel, River of Dust, the young toddler child of this missionary American missionary couple who seem like they're going to be a very quiet kind of couple out there on the plains of northwest rural China. Well, before we're in 20 pages or something, the Mongolian bandit steals their toddler child. And you have to have things happen because your characters, I think my characters, have to respond. And that's how we learn who they are. So in this instance, with Marriage and Other Monuments, you put your characters in situations that are unsteady. They are on shaky ground, and then you have to see how they manage. How do they handle it? So I do think about plot. I think about it as storyline as an extension of character.
And now I'm going to ask, not how long does it take you to finish a book, because I think that's not as interesting, honestly, as do you have a process that works for you to get into the writing, stay in it, establish your flow, and finish? Or do you experience a lot of ups and downs as you try to immerse yourself in the storyline, the characters, and maybe find yourself stopping and starting? How is that for you?
Well, I feel like I'm lucky in that I enjoy writing so much. I know some people, when I hear them speak about writing, it just sounds like it's a very complicated and fraught experience. For some writers, can be painful even. For me, it always feels joyous in a certain way, even if I don't know what I'm doing, which is a lot of the time, because I sort of get to see, and this isn't in a said in a bragging way, but I get to see my intelligence. I think we all do as we write. We get to see how we think. We see it on the page, and I feel like a kid playing with finger paints or something. I'm happy when I'm in the midst of it. Then I have to step back, and the editorial side of my brain has to go back and look at it and go, "Oh, actually, that wasn't so great after all. That wasn't so good a scene, and you need a lot more work on this." And it has to go through many, many drafts. But but I do just enjoy diving in, being in the midst of a project, and I'm going to describe a very old-fashioned way that I write novels. I use 3x5 cards. And I tend to tell my novels in multiple points of view. Several of them have been written with 4 points of view. Some are 3 points of view, and there's one that's 2 points of view. Victoria Swan is 2 points of view. But this novel is 4 points of view. And so I use colored, multicolored 3x5 cards. Each of the characters has a different color so that I can tell which one is belongs to which. And I put up on the bookshelves, you see my bookshelves back here, a string, an old-fashioned twine, and I tape to it, hanging down lengthwise, each chapter. And each chapter tells me who's the point of view character based on the color of the 3x5 card. And then the key thing that happens for that character, the setting, of course, Bobby in the kitchen with Cynthia, a fight, and then few key notes to myself about what's to be accomplished in that scene. It's not telling myself how to do it. It's not telling myself exactly the words, although sometimes I can have some inkling of something and I'll throw it on that card and it'll help me. And I hang these up next to each other. And as I write in the coming days and weeks, each time I finish a chapter, because I'll go to my desk in the morning and I'll dive into whatever chapter I'm on my 3x5 cards. When I finish a chapter and I feel like I've written a first draft of it, I get to pull the 3x5 card off the line. The point is, I have a system. It works for me. It's very old fashioned. And then I pull it off. And so what's happening is you can call that the plot, but it's also key emotional moments that I'm trying to take my character through. And I can see it. I know where we're headed in some way. And then in the midst of a chapter, if I need to go in a different direction, I will. And then I'll revise some of the next chapters. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's wonderful. I love the visual construct that you've created by describing the cards on the strings. That is definitely something that sticks with me. I've never done that, but I can imagine it would be a very compelling reminder. Do you leave it up all day and all night until
Oh
you're
yeah. No,
done?
it's there. It's there the whole length of the time I'm working on the book. It's there. And so that means that when I come into the room, I can look at it and go, okay, what's coming up on on, tomorrow? What's, yeah. And I can kind of have a sense of where I'm headed.
And if I were to bet, I would say you probably do write every day.
When I'm working on a book, I absolutely do. Yeah, I'm not working on one right now. I'm not in the midst of one right in the moment, but yeah, definitely. And it comes kind of fast and furiously. Once I sort of have a vision of sort of what this thing is, this big thing, it requires that you keep so much in your head. I know a lot of people, my peers, and maybe this is what you do too. I don't know, Mary, use the computer a lot to store a lot of information and a lot of research, and they don't feel, but I feel like I have to keep it all just in my head, or um so that I sort of have it at the ready when I need it. I have to sort of press on and keep writing because I've got to get all that stuff that's sort of in there that belongs to this book out somewhere on the page. And then I can mess around with it. Then I can move it around. And then, all right, that scene that I thought of in the shower, okay, it actually doesn't belong here. It needs to come much earlier in the book, or, then I can move it all around. But during the time when I'm actually just writing a first draft, it's pretty intense. And I can be up at 4 in the morning. I can get up to use the bathroom at 4 a.m. and my mind is going, I got it. I got it. I know what the next thing is. And then I have to go to my desk at like 4 a.m. Not, it's not good. I can make myself really exhausted during these periods.
But it works for you, which is the key, Virginia.
Yeah, it does. It does. Although not every one of my books has been published. So it sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't.
Just one wrap-up question in this realm. You finished Marriage and Other Monuments.
Mhm.
How does that feel when, you are finished with the book, you have a contract, you're delivering on it. Do you feel exhilaration, celebration, or maybe sorry to be done, or a mix?
Definitely a mix, definitely a mix. And I'm someone who sort of wants to keep working on it as long as humanly possible. So, you have to finally get your edits in, and I never want to, and I always want to keep tweaking, and I want to keep working on the sentences, and so it's hard for me to ever feel that something is fully finished. It feels like there can always be room for improvement. There can always be room for tightening it and strengthening the language or whatever. But eventually they do take it out of your hands. It's true. And then it's actually published.
I love they take it away from you phrase. Uh, I always feel that way myself.
Yeah.
It could always be better, I say to myself, but no, it's done now. Then you have this interval, all authors today have
Yeah.
this interval where you're on book tour, you're publicizing the book, and how does that work for you, especially if you do want to start thinking about the next book project? How do you find a balance in your life to be ready to go talk and answer the same questions realistically,
Yeah. Yeah.
bookstore after bookstore, and also try to keep alive in your mind maybe a new book that you are getting excited about? Tell us about that.
I actually printed out today a novel that I wrote so long ago. I can't even tell you, like the 1990s practically, but I've revised it over the years. And I'm curious to see, with my increased abilities as a novelist, which I do think it's a practice where I personally get better at it with the years and with practice. And I wonder if I can revive this one in some way.
Wonderful. And that's one of my wrap-up questions. You've evolved in this decade of writing and publishing and moving from different historical eras, different character types. What have you internalized and how has it changed your experience of being a writer?
Well, um, I think I think that for a very, very long time, even after having a book published, there was a part of me that felt like a student of writing and that I was an aspiring writer in certain ways. I think this is my fifth book since 2013. And so in a dozen years, I've done 5 books, and I've just worked very, very hard and very consistently to get those books written and out into the world. And I'm very proud of each of them. And I feel like I can finally relax a little bit. I feel relaxed talking about the work. I feel relaxed with my peers. I feel just really, really happy to meet readers. The whole thing just feels very easy and joyous. And it no longer feels like I have something to prove in some way. Part of my backstory is that I was a student of writing and got an MFA and started to have my first literary agent when I was 27. And it was a very, very sort of hotshot agent. And I went on and had um, three literary agents and 5 novels that they tried to sell. And basically, most of those came close, but didn't succeed. And so I had my first agent at 27 and my debut at 53. So I had a lot of years of being an aspiring writer, pushing, trying to get a book out into the world. And it took a long time. And so consequently, I think it's taken me a while to sort of pull up my chair to the table with fellow authors and just feel like, okay, I've done it.
I love that you use the word joy so
Mhm.
often, Virginia. And I think that's so encouraging that you have now shared. You had to wait a long time to get into the market. You kept writing, and now you feel you can think about your accomplishment with pride and joy. And I love also the word relax, which is not to say you're not going to be writing another novel because you're already engaging, as you just told us, with how are you going to perhaps go back to that treasure trove in the drawer or in the file cabinet of previously written with this new insight and experience and everything you've learned in the meantime. That's feels so right to me. And congratulations with
You?
that being how you feel in this moment of being out there publicizing one book and feeling like I do this for myself.
And for readers now, which is really lovely. It's like, it's really cool that there are people who've read a number of my books. It makes me extremely happy. And for people who are aspiring writers, the best thing you can possibly do is just relax and enjoy the process. I think that it gets so frustrating, it gets so hard, and you feel like you're hitting your head against the wall with the marketplace, with trying to sell a book and all of that. And it is a terrible market. So I just want to be encouraging and remind people to just press on, keep doing it, and try to retain the joy in it. Maintain your self-respect and assume that it will happen, that you're going to have that moment when it happens. And also keep your eye out for lots of different types of opportunities. I think that people sometimes get confused and just think there's only one way to really succeed as a writer. New York Times bestselling, whatever, or hotshot New York agent, or whatever it is you're aiming for. But keep an eye out for other opportunities and possibilities, smaller presses, joint events with fellow unpublished aspiring writers, connect with literary journals. I'm the fiction editor for Pangyris. Come and read fiction with our team and have fun with that. And you start to make more connections, get involved with the Boston Authors Club. So, just find your community, keep building it, and enjoy it, and enjoy your fellow readers and writers.
Thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation. I've learned a lot about your baby unique string theory of writing your characters and your chapters and the fulfillment from finishing yet another amazing book. So thank you so much, Virginia.
You really, really appreciate you having me, and I love the organization, and just the fact that we can gather like this is really wonderful. So
And
thank
talk
you.
about why authors write.